Hi, this is Mr. Titanium, i.e. Richard Wagner, your host, Richard Wagner. I am so happy to be here. Today, we're going to discuss something that's of great concern to us. I think society needs to understand what the difference is between a male and a female. And it turns out that the Supreme Court needs to be able to determine whether or not trans women should be able to play in female sports. And we're going to answer that question today, or at least we're going to attempt to answer that question. But the way I'm going to answer that question is through giving you the exact science that I give to medical doctors. So by the end of today's discussion, you will know exactly the same information that I teach the pre-meds. And believe it or not, you learn about the differences between males and females as a pre-med student by the time you go to medical school. They expect you to know the difference. I'm sorry. It's just so absurd to me. I can't believe that our society has gotten to this point. I just can't. But let me treat this subject with the scientific rigor that it deserves. And it does deserve a lot of scientific rigor because it's actually very interesting. So I'll start off and tell you that when we go and we teach our pre-meds, it's actually a full hour and 15-minute lecture. And then it's followed by, in the afternoon, a complete 3.5 to 4 hour laboratory. I kid you not, a lot of time is spent on sex determination. And I'll tell you how we do it. Well, at least the laboratory portion. What we first do is we have to instruct the students not to eat, drink, or chew gum at least a half an hour prior to coming to lab, because lab was like at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So that was right around the lunchtime hour. And we didn't want the students putting, food or other substances that might alter the findings of our tests. So we wanted their mouths to be just them, not the roast beef sandwich that they just ate. So anyways, once the students came in, they were all required to bring in toothpicks. We supplied the microscopes, the slides, and the methylene blue. Methylene blue, I didn't just say that. Oh my God, I can't believe that methylene blue has become the entire health craze of 2025. You could get off of YouTube and hear about methylene blue. Well, I'm not going to talk about whether or not this stuff is good or bad for you or whether you should use it. I'm just telling you that we used it as a stain for our slides. And the way we prepared the slides is by scraping cells from the cheek and spreading it on a slide and then staining it. And the stain, the methylene blue, actually does a very, very good job of staining DNA. But here's the kicker. Believe it or not every cell, you can't see the DNA in your cells. That's crazy. It's microscopic. It's invisible to light microscopy because the light waves are significantly larger than the diffracting capabilities just simply aren't there in light microscopes. So to put it mildly, you can't see your chromosomes. But what happens is that inside your cheek, we're constantly creating new new cells. And so there's constantly cell proliferation. And the reason why this is significant is that during cell proliferation, the first thing that happens is we replicate our DNA. After we replicate our DNA becomes condensed, very tightly packed. And you can think about it like this. Think about a bunch of strings that are now being wound around thimbles, and those thimbles are now very tightly packed so that you can't fit anything else in. And it's highly organized, highly packed, highly condensed. That's what happened. And in this state, the chromosomes aren't capable of transcription or translation for that matter, but translation obviously comes later. But the machinery for both replication and the machinery for transcription can't even attach to the DNA because it's so tightly packed. All right, it just can't attach. So nothing goes on in the cell at this juncture except the process of replication. And while these chromosomes are so tightly packed, we can actually see them. So and what happens is that we've all heard of meiosis and meiosis. Meiosis is what's generally done somatically throughout our body. Meiosis is what happens in our germline cells. So right now we're talking about mitotic cell division. And when we talk about mitotic cell division, we talk about the various different phases: metaphase, metaphase, prophase, anaphase, telophase. And these different phases represent different believe it or not, it's very weird because while we make these distinctions between what happens in each phase, it's far more continuous than disjointed pieces. And what happens is that right at the point that we're in anaphase, before we go into telophase is actually where the cells begin to separate. We can count the chromosomes, and counting and organizing the chromosomes is where we can determine sex determination. It's also called karyotyping. So all the karyotypes are always done on cells that are in the active process of proliferation, because that's the only time that we can really observe chromosomes. And when we observe these chromosomes, we look towards the sex chromosomes. And when we look at the sex, all right, so let me back up a little bit. We have 23 chromosome pairs, or in other words, 46 chromosomes. Of the 23 chromosome pairs, 22 of those chromosome pairs are known as autosomes. They are the DNA that affects the somatic, every single cell in the body. However, the last two, they're not last. We're just arbitrarily making them last. I'm calling them the 23, are the sex chromosomes. And you have two of them, one given to you by mom and one given to you by dad. The one that's given to you by mom is always an X. So let's write that down right here. I'm actually going to write that. It's an X. That's always given to you by mom. However, dad can either give you an X or a Y. If dad gives you an extra X, then you have a typical female. However, if the dad gives you, I did this wrong. However, if the dad gives you a Y, you're now a typical male. But there are problems that occur. Sometimes cell replication and cell division doesn't always work correctly. And there are times where sometimes the father doesn't give anything. And what you have is an X. And this is the null symbol. And this turns out to be a female. This turns out to be a male. Okay? So this can happen. You can have flaws. But in the same way that you can get an X and an O, another thing can happen. You can get this. Oh, here, let me show you. Oh, yuck. You can get this. And this would be a female. Now, it turns out that 3 X's is called tri-X. I I mean triple X. I called it Tri-X. It's my photography in me. Tri-X used to be a very, very popular type of color film that us photographers used to use all the time. I meant to say triple X. I'm sorry. That was just a slip. So that's one of the things can happen. Another thing that can happen is you can get this. And this appears as a male. And what this is called is Klinefelter Syndrome. And sufferers of Klinefelter Syndrome, all right, what they have is they're male in appearance, but they have usually very, very little hair. They can develop breasts, all right. I believe that they can suffer from some gynecomastia. Their testes are usually underdeveloped, and they often have smaller penises. So there's that. But they are typically viable. They are of normal intelligence, and they're just people. But you can have this problem, all right? There's another type of problem that we can have. We can have this. We can have an X, and we can have a Y and a Y, and that is typically a male. Of course, it's a male. And what this is called is Jacob's syndrome. And Jacob's syndrome, most of the time it goes undetected because people that suffer from Jacob's syndrome are typically very average. I mean, not very average, but I mean, there's nothing really that distinguishes them terribly from the normal population. There might be subtle differences, practically, indistinguishable between somebody that has simply an X and a Y. But the one thing that we cannot have, absolutely cannot have, is a YY. This is not a viable organism. You must have an X in order for the organism to be viable. So all these mutations that I just showed you, these and this one over here are all viable, but a YY, that's not going to work ever. All right. So the question is, how does this happen? How can you get, if you're supplying one chromosome from the dad and one chromosome from the mom, how does this happen? So let me just go through an explanation. All right. So when we go through meiosis, let's think of the cell like this. Here, let me draw it. We're going to draw a cell, and we're going to draw a cell which happens to have two chromosomes. Okay. It's going to have an X chromosome, and it's going to have a Y chromosome. And I'm making the Y too big, but I'm doing this for illustrative purposes. The Y chromosome is a tiny little nothing chromosome with very little information on it. That's why you can live without one. And we know you can live without one because we went over that X without anything situation, which is called Turner syndrome, and they survive just fine without a Y chromosome or another X chromosome. So we know that you do not need Y chromosome to survive. Anyways, so here's how the cell starts out. After the first division, what you wind up with is the following: two cells. Each cell has DNA from the mom, and they have DNA from the dad. Okay? This is meiosis, okay? So this is what happens in your germline cells. Namely, the end result is going to be an egg or a sperm, okay? Just to be clear on what we're doing here, all right, to show you how problems occur, okay? So we're going over the basics. After you've created these two cells can then divide, or do divide again, to create four cells. And inside of these 4 cells, what you'll see is one strand, another strand, and this guy. So here, what I'm trying to illustrate is that we go through a process of cell division. The initial process of cell division looks an awful lot like mitosis, where we create 2 daughter cells that are genetically identical to the parent cell. These 2 cells then divide, and what they do is they take half of their DNA and give it to one cell, and half of their DNA and give it to the other cell. If this was a female, these would all be eggs. If this was a male, this would all be sperm. Now, if this was a female, I somewhat lied. I did. They're not all viable. It's really crazy how this works. It turns out that of all these eggs, only one egg is really viable. That's the way it works. You can think of it as all these donate the stuff inside of them to make one really good, viable egg. But listen, this is an interesting subject, and I'll talk about it at some time in the future. I don't want to discuss this now because it's deep. There's a lot to discuss, but I'm just explaining at least how meiosis works. Now, in the course of doing this cell division right over here, where we take this cell and bring the mother and father portions apart, things can happen. And let me explain. What happens is if we have a cell, all right, we can think of it, this is a human cell, coming down, this thing is called a spindle fiber, okay? And what happens is that the spindle fiber attaches to a strand of DNA. And what happens is that as we begin to create 2 cells, the spindle fibers pull the DNA apart. And in pulling the DNA apart, they enable us to have this cell division. But sometimes what can happen, it's messed up actually. Sometimes what can happen is you can have a cell and it can have a spindle fiber over here, but instead of just one strand of DNA connecting to a spindle fiber, very, very rarely, it's an error, you can accidentally get 2 strands attached, and this strand gets nothing. So now they pull apart in different directions, because that's what happens when cell division occurs. All right. And what happens is you create your 2 separate cells. This cell contains 2 chromosomes, and this cell contains none. So if this cell contains 2 chromosomes, what it's going to contain, let's say, is an X and a Y. This cell contains none. So if this sperm cell, for example, went ahead and fertilized a female cell, this sperm cell combined with a female cell would be an X, another X, and a Y. Conversely, if on the other hand, this sperm cell created an offspring with an X, with an egg, with an X. There's only an X in an egg, but let's just put this down. So here's the mom. And now we're not contributing anything from the dad. Okay? Nothing from the dad. So the dad contributes nothing. So this is how we get our Turner syndrome. And this is how we get our Jacobs syndrome. So that's interesting. So what we understand is that through the incorrect process of cell division that happens very rarely, we can occasionally get genetic mutations. And we've just discussed those. So those are some of the things that are some of the genetic issues that involve sex determination and how we, view men and women, because obviously with extra X's, it changes the characteristics of what we consider a male to be, doesn't it? So now let's go on to something a little bit more nebulous and actually very, very interesting. In 1985, there was this Spanish Olympian. Her name was María José. What was her name? María José. Here, I have it written down. Hold on 1 minute. I have it right here. Hold on. Her name was María José Martínez-Patiño. And basically what she had was Complete Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome. And let me describe what this was. Some people have a genetic mutation that prevents the formation or the ability for their androgen receptors to work. So this particular individual had an XY chromosome, but they also had no ability to receive signals from testosterone. So you could have given this person as much testosterone as you wanted, and it would have no effect on her. And notice that I'm calling somebody with an XY or her, because she had no ability to develop as a male. And a person with complete androgen a lack of androgen sensitivity develops as a female, fully breasted, thin waist, nice hips. You can tell I just love women. I just love women. I love the way that they look. I love the way that they think. I love the way that they talk. I just love women. I think they're wonderful. Oh my God, what does that make me? I don't know. Not from this era, that's for sure. All right, so getting on with the story, these people who are XY develop completely and totally physically as a woman. They have a vagina, they have a clitoris, although it's somewhat smaller on average than other women's clitorises. They have a vagina, although their vagina and the entrance is very, very narrow. They do not have ovaries. What happens is that their testes remain very tiny, immature, and they remain in the abdomen for the rest of their lives. So they never descend. But they develop they're usually very beautiful. They have excellent skin because they don't develop acne as a result of their androgen insensitivity. So that's kind of interesting. And so it's possible for there to be somebody with an XY chromosome, biologically male, but 100% a woman. So this female athlete in 1985 in the Olympics, who I believe won a medal, got tested and was found that she wasn't genetically a woman, but she fought it and she won. And as a result of what she did in winning, they threw out the genetic test as a measure of whether or not a person is a woman. And so basically they said if somebody can have an XY chromosome and they have no ability to utilize testosterone, and testosterone is what makes the difference between somebody having a competitive advantage or not, then we have to change our criteria. And they did. And that's how the criteria for Olympic athletes got changed. That was when it all started. Okay. Fast forward a little bit. By the way, that was a situation of complete androgen insensitivity. Believe it or not, there's something known as partial androgen insensitivity. So there's so there's a spectrum. So that complicates everything, right? So now, at what point does the level of androgen insensitivity disqualify an individual from participating in female athletics? I don't have an answer to that. I'm sorry. I'm just putting that out there. All right. Now, going on, there is some other issues that occur with people. About 1.7% of the population are born with ambiguous or indeterminate genitalia. And this is caused by a lot of reasons. I'm not going to go through all of them, but most of them are hormonal. All right. So this does happen. And we have to work these things out to see what, in fact, the individual winds up being in terms of their identity. Do they wind up being a man or do they wind up being a woman? A while back, parents and doctors used to make those decisions, I believe, almost arbitrarily on, things that were truly non-scientific. And that's a travesty. So now that brings us all the way up to today in a way. All right. So now I've talked about the problems of ambiguous. Oh yeah. Interesting. Fun fact. 1.7% of the population has, this is going to be great, is born with ambiguous genitalia. It turns out that that's the same percentage of our population that's born with red hair. So my daughter, who has beautiful red hair, oh my God, my daughter is so pretty. What a beautiful young lady. She's studying to become a psychologist. Yeah, I guess I did a number on her. She's just like, I have a crazy dad I got to take care of. I'm sure that is it. But my God. I just have to say that the best part of life is having my family. I have the most wonderful wife. I don't know what I would do without her. I love her so dearly. We've been married close to 30 years, and every day that I wake, I am grateful that she's by my side. Oh my God, I am just head over heels about her. And we have the most wonderful, thoughtful, kind children. I'm so blessed. With all the heartache, with all the terrible things that have happened to us in our family, and there have been a lot of them, and I'm sure that's true of everybody of everyday Americans like us. We have our heartache, we have our fair share, but I got to tell you, oh my God, my family makes all of it worthwhile. No doubt about that. But anyways, we're going on to discussing whether or not trans women should participate. I mean, trans women should participate in female sports. And that's what's the question that's in front of the Supreme Court. And at first glance, it seems very obvious because, I was taught, I don't know what you were taught, but this was what I was taught when I was 4 years old. Mr. Rogers came on the TV set. And by the way, I love Mr. Rogers. He was a very influential man in terms of my personality, makeup, and characteristic. So at any time, I'm just going to bust out and sing about Welcome to My Neighborhood. But what he's saying was, boys are fancy on the outsides. Girls are fancy on your insides. Well, something that made a lot of sense to a 4-year-old. And so that's what that to me, the simple fact that the Supreme Court has to decide on whether or not boys should play in girls' sports is somewhat absurd to me. But what I wanted to do in this conversation is point out that the phenotype and the genotype may not always correspond. And not only that, But what goes inside a person's mind is sometimes not consistent with how they look or what their appearance is or what their genes say that they are. All right? So we have to take that into consideration. However, there can be no doubt, and this is something that's true, and I guess I'm going to have to talk about this. This actually hurts me a little bit because, sometimes there are scientific facts, and what happens is scientists often avoid these facts because they want to spare society. But in sparing society, they're not telling the entire truth, and I think that is fundamentally wrong. And no matter what your beliefs are, like, I'll be honest with you, my beliefs are that trans women should have all the same opportunities as anybody else in society, just as trans men should. And I am very much opposed to any type of bigotry towards them, very much. In fact, when I owned my software company, it wasn't something that I thought about, but I just happened to have hired a trans woman. And she was a genius. And she is a genius, I should say. One of the most brilliant people I've ever met. And what a fantastic person. She is really, really wonderful. And I am so glad that she was a member of my staff. The diversity of my staff made my company truly strong. So I can't speak strongly enough for how I feel that bigotry based upon things like sexual orientation or skin color is so fundamentally wrong. And you know something? I believe most of our society believes that. Regardless, there's no such word as irregardless. Regardless of what our political beliefs may be. I truly believe that whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, we all know that this is wrong. But what we're talking about now are allowing people with XY chromosomes to participate in female athletics as a result of the hormones that have been provided to them, which will affect their phenotypic characteristics. But what we're really talking about is to what degree does that Y chromosome provide advantages, competitive advantages over what we'll call cis women. That means women that have two X chromosomes, biological women. And what we know is that the Y chromosome confers tremendous amount of advantage in athletic competition. It just does. And not only that, but during development, what people don't realize is that the male's contribution to the development process consists only of the DNA. When we look at the sperm is devoid of all sorts of organelles. It has nothing. All it is literally a DNA vessel with surrounded by a cell wall. It has two mitochondria. As we know, mitochondria, is the powerhouse of the cell. It creates the ADP, that power stuff. But you know what those two mitochondria are used for? Only for one thing. That's propelling the flagella that enables the sperm to travel to the egg. That's all that's there. It's just DNA. But the egg has so much more stuff. And I kind of alluded to it when I started explaining about things called polar bodies, where 3 of the eggs donate really all of their goodness to one egg. And what that means is that in this egg, you have your transcription factors, you have your mitochondria, you have all sorts of organelles and things that are necessary for the initial development. And this is where the developmental programming resides. And so when we start development, what happens is we initiate a developmental program where there's a predefined way that the organism develops. There's a pattern, and it happens this way all the time. That's how we know when a baby develops, fingerprints or a heartbeat or neural activity or any of these things. And it always happens at these times because there is a developmental programming. Now, that developmental programming is responsible for a variety of physiological differences between men and women. We can look at the sex organs, but we can also look at bone development, skeletal muscle development, and other things. But it turns out that our brain architectures are fundamentally different as a result of the hormonal influences that are beyond a person's control while we're developing. You cannot control these things. So in the same way you cannot control whether you have two X's or two Y chromosomes, you can't control the way in which your brain developed when your mom was pregnant with you. You just can't. So men have men brains and women have women brains. And there are differences between the brain architectures that make men brains suitable and more able at certain tasks, or really not more able. They solve problems differently, certain spatial problems differently than the way women solve it. And we've demonstrated this. This isn't, I'm not saying what my belief is. I'm talking about scientific fact. And in fact, it comports with our everyday experiences, doesn't it? We all know that men and women just think differently. And it's not that one thinks better than the other, because that's not true at all. In fact, what makes life so amazing and so wonderful is how we complement each other. When people complement each other, that makes the greatest team, because one person does what they're doing good at, the other person does what they're good at, and you come together and do something great. And that's actually the essence of teamwork and society at large, that we all have our different things and we come together and we do our different things and create something bigger and better. The sum of the parts is greater than the whole, so to speak. It's kind of like that. But men and women, I know this is going to come as a surprise to some of our progressive friends who just take everything out of context and to an extreme. And we have to be very concerned about the far right and the far left. Most of us are in the middle. I saw the other day that 45% of our population is independent, and I was just like, oh, thank the Lord, because I'm independent. I'm not a right or a left. I go where the facts lead me, or at least I try to. And I just got to say that we're heading in a bad way, and a lot of the things that are being promoted about the minority of things that are happening. The things that are concerning us on a day-to-day issue are being obfuscated by the nonsense. Enough said about that. Anyways, getting back to this particular nonsense of telling the difference between men and women, having a Y chromosome certainly overall, on average, for the most part, 99% of the time confers an athletic advantage, regardless of when you've started hormone therapy. That's been demonstrated. That's the fact. Now, it is possible to start hormone therapy very, very early in a person's life and have those puberty blockers and and they can develop in a way which makes a person indistinguishable, a male indistinguishable from a female. That is entirely possible, and I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I have some thoughts on that. Mucking with children this way, really? That's what we're up to? Me and my wife, when our children were growing up, met an individual who confided in me. He confided in me because my son had recently gotten what I'll say became autistic. And we were going through a hard time. And so when somebody sees somebody else going through a hard time and they're going through a hard time, they'll be like, oh, they're not going to be judgmental and I need to talk to somebody, so I'm going to speak to them. Now this person had a little boy and all he liked to do is play with was Barbie dolls. He liked to dress up as a princess. He insisted he was a girl in spite of the fact that they told him he was a boy and he had a penis. All right. Didn't want to be a boy. Didn't want to have a penis. Wanted to wear dresses. Wanted to wear dresses to school. Wanted to play with Barbie dolls. Wanted to be a girl. And the kid was like 3 years old. Oh my God. It's just like, damn it. If this is what he's doing at 3, I can't imagine what he's going to be doing later on in life. All right. So because I'm old, I have the opportunity to tell you what happened. All right. He grew out of that stage entirely. He didn't want to be thought of as a girl. He became not a football player, excuse me. He became a lacrosse player, got a full scholarship for playing lacrosse, is now married, has a career. I don't know what he's doing, but I just recently found out that through the grapevine that he had grandchildren. And I am so envious because I want grandchildren. I wish I have 2 very beautiful women, and this isn't a commercial, but it's a commercial. My oldest daughter, she is fantastic. She is really beautiful looking, bright, has a great career, earns a good amount of money, and wants to be a mom. Anybody out there that knows somebody who's in the, we'll say, Central Florida area who's like a guy who like knows how to treat a girl like a girl. That's what my daughter wants. So if you're that person, I have a girl for you. And my youngest daughter, oh my God, she's beautiful, but she's still in college. But she's looking, but she doesn't know where she's getting into graduate school. So I think maybe we have to wait on that. But I have 2 daughters. So make sure that you like, subscribe, and comment to me. Get back to me if you want to date these girls. Oh, they're going to be so pissed at me for saying this. Holy smokes, did I... No, it's just that I want to be a granddad. I am so envious. All right. So, but the point being is that we don't know what the future has in store, and that what a child believes, thinks of, feels at a certain point in their development does not mean that that's going to be consistent throughout their entire development. It may be, it does happen. Not saying it doesn't happen. But we have to be very thoughtful about this. And, oh my God, people don't know this. You're not being told this. But like when you give a child puberty blockers, you do terrible things to them. I don't even want to go into it. It's horrific. It's not, you know something? Write a comment below if you want me to describe in gory detail what these puberty blockers do to children. They don't just block their puberty. They destroy their lives. It's terrible. All right. So I'm not really up for doing reassignment surgeries on children. I'm opposed to it actually 100% all the time. There's never a reason to do it. Opposed to gender reaffirming stuff for little kids. I just think that physicians that engage in that practice should be brought up on malpractice. Hospitals that engaged in this should have their license removed. It's gross. All right, back to the should trans women play in female sports? Well, the answer is really obvious. No. It's not fair. All right. Listen, I did a whole entire video on Rosalind Franklin. You don't know who Rosalind Franklin is? She should have won the Nobel Prize in 1962. She didn't because actually she passed away prior to that of cancer at a very, very young age. And they don't award the Nobel Prize posthumously. But she should have gotten it. The Nobel Prize was for the structure of DNA and was awarded to Francis Crick and James Watson and this other guy, Wilkinson. I can't remember his first name. Jackass, if you ask me. I mean, just from what I know, from what I read of him, he seems like a pretty much of a douchebag. And I'll tell you why. Because this young lady, Rosalind Franklin, of course, she wouldn't be young now, but at the time she was young. She went to Cambridge. She should have gotten her PhD. You know, she didn't get a PhD. She got a certificate. You know why she got her certificate? Because at the time, and this was 1945, Cambridge refused to give PhDs to women. That's it. Women were denied. It was prejudice and bigotry and how men put women down. Not all men. There are normal people that were married that respected their wives and their daughters and so forth. But, you know, there's a group that, you know, not so much. And it was academia, all right, of all places. You know, the enlightened. It wasn't until 1947 that Cambridge started actually giving PhDs to women. So when you think about how the struggles that the women's movement has had in order to just get a sliver of recognition, to be able to be afforded the same opportunities as men, it's remarkable. And now you have this whole entire Title IX, which is set up to protect women. And now you're allowing men to hijack women's sports. That's what's happening. Plain and simple. You want to tell me that Leah Thomas, a 6'3", 210-pound dude with a penis, should have been in the same locker room as Riley Gaines, let alone competing against her? I don't want that dude in the same locker room as Riley. What a sweet young lady. What a nice young lady. I am so impressed with her. She has courage and chutzpah. So it takes the Supreme Court to figure out that this is wrong. And we have progressives that are fighting for this. Honest to God, the progressives are destroying the Democrats and they're trying to destroy our country. These people are kooks. And we're allowing them to present arguments as if we should take them seriously. Like we don't know the goddamn difference between a boy and a girl. Honestly, it's very simple. We know that a boy has an XX and we know that a boy has an XY and we know that a girl has an XX. There are situations, very rare, but there are some situations where we have to look at the individual and make a determination on something else. But for the most part, we can make it determined this way. So then why don't we do that? Make it determined this way. And then if there's an individual exception, let's look at that on a case-by-case basis. Because that's really the only thing that we can do. Because there's no way that you can tell me that Leah Thomas, joke of the century, should have won the NCAA swimming competition. It's not fair. It's not right. You disenfranchise over 50% of our population, 51% of our population, as it turns out. It's wrong. And we shouldn't need the Supreme Court to tell us right from wrong. And why is it so many of my Democratic friends have fallen into this hook, line, and sinker? Women have you. I know this one girl, and she is up there, and she is virtue signaling. It's crazy. Every single day of my life, I see her virtue signaling. And it's disgusting. I'm just like, do you understand what you're virtue signaling for? The mutilation of little boys and girls? I swear, I just don't understand. It's just like things that are obvious to me have become like lightning rods. And they shouldn't be. Yes, it's true that there are scientific and medical issues that arise and so forth, but you deal with those on a case-by-case basis, and we don't do absurd things. If you're dealing with things, if you're worried about one person, okay, one person out of anywhere between 1 and 20,000 and 1 in 64,000 has this androgen insensitivity situation, That's a rarity. Don't worry about the rarities. The rules are designed for most of us. The exceptions are designed for the remainder. Common sense. All right. I'm through with my preaching. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I know it's a little bit different than what you've previously heard from me, but I guess I just had to weigh in on the fact that for some reason, there's confusion about whether or not boys should be playing girls' sports. And that's fundamentally what we're talking about. So let me be very clear on this. There's this guy, okay? It's called the Alien Project. He cut off his fingers. He did all sorts of body modifications. He put spikes in his head. He actually colored the sclera of his eyes, tattooed them. All right, tattooed the corneas and everything. Tattooed everything. His entire body's black. Made himself look like an alien. He looks like an alien. Absolutely does not look human. Doesn't look human. Looks like an alien. Just because this individual put in all these body modifications and mutilated himself, does that make him any less terrestrial than you or I? No, he's a human being, just like you and I, no matter what he did to himself. Conversely, all right, you look at these Hollywood makeup artists, all right? Let's say they make up somebody to look like a Klingon, and every single day of that person's life, he dresses himself up like a Klingon. Does that make him a Klingon? No, it doesn't make him a Klingon, no matter how much makeup you put on. No matter what you put into your body, no matter what you cut off from your body, you are who you are. I have news for you. So playing dress up is just playing dress up. All right. There is that aspect of this too. All right. And there's this aspect. A male who identifies as a female, or a female who identifies as a male, who has a female being defined as somebody with an XX chromosome and a male being defined as somebody with an XY chromosome. All right. And the person with an XY chromosome identifies as a female, and the person with the XX chromosome identifies as a male. I'm talking about those situations. Not all the other ones. I'm just talking about those which are the majority of situations that we're talking about. They believe, they feel, they know that they were put in the wrong body, that they are really a woman living in a man's body, or they're really a man living in a woman's body. That's what they believe. The reality is that's not a biological or physiological phenomena. That's a psychological phenomena. Now, the question really is, how do we deal with that psychological phenomena? Well, to some degree, it's up to the individual and the physician and the treating physician's determination how they're going to deal with that person throughout their lives. All right. Now, there have been a lot of studies that have done based upon people that have transitioned, and to determine whether or not their levels of depression have either gone up, stayed the same, or gone down. Believe it or not, one study after another, and they stopped doing the studies, had demonstrated that the level of depression increased after transition, not decreased. Just wanted to put in a little bit of science into this. So, going back to these people that transition, cutting off body parts, giving themselves breasts, removing breasts, whatever you do in order to make your body look like what you believe you are. Should, as a society, we treat these people, should we treat a trans woman the same way that we would treat, a biological woman? And the answer is, of course we should. Absolutely. But the only thing is that they can't play in athletic. They can't participate in female athletics, in athletic competitions. And you're going to be like, well, you're being bigoted. No. Female athletics is not in the same category as being a computer programmer. It requires a certain level of physicality, and there's the idea of fair play, and it's distinctly different based upon the physiological differences between men and women in order to allow women to compete fairly and freely. And it's important that as a society, we maintain that at all costs. I don't know if I said this before. I can't remember, but it's worth saying again. The way we measure the advancement of a society is by the way we treat the women. And I have news for you. The progressives, in their desire to push us forward, have taken us backwards. They have taken us backwards in so many ways. These people do not base their rhetoric on knowledge or science. They emote. It's emotional. And you have to make, when you're making policy, you need to make rational decisions. Decisions which meet the needs of the majority of our society. That's going to be good for our society. That's going to push our society together. Instead of making rules that allow us to destroy the wonderful successes that have taken decades they've worked, maybe even centuries, one could say. It's not right. And nobody should be defending this behavior. And does it take somebody with a genius IQ to have to tell you this? I don't think so. I think most of us have common sense out there and know that a boy is a boy and a girl's a girl, and you can't have boys playing against girls in athletic competitions. It's unsafe and it's unfair. And it disenfranchises the female athletes. It's so cut and dry. And I've just gone through all the science. I've explained to you everything that a medical doctor knows. Now you know the same thing that a medical doctor knows. So honestly, should men participate in female athletics? It's a very simple question. It's a yes or no one. Maybe there should be exceptions, but they should be exceptions and judged based upon the exceptionality. But for 99.999% of us, these things need to be in place. I truly wish the Democratic Party would go back to the party of free speech and anti-war. I don't know what's happened to you. You've abandoned me. I'm really disappointed. I blame our politicians. You've allowed a group of individuals that are fundamentally uneducated, uninformed, and are anti-American to hijack our party. It no longer resembles the common sense party that it once was. I'm really disappointed. I'm really disappointed in the lack of backbone, and I'm actually disappointed in the population that votes for these people. You take a look at AOC. The district. I lived in New York. I know the district everything could have been better. It could have been so much better. She could have done somewhat. All she had to do was not ixnay on the xnay on the Amazon deal, and she would have done a world of good for her constituents. And yet these morons still vote for her. What do you want me to tell you? We have a bunch of ignorant people formulating the American electorate. And It's the ignorance in the people that our founding fathers were concerned about, which is why we're not a democracy. We're a republic, all right? A representational republic. And so the reason why there's the electoral college is because there was a belief that citizens didn't have enough common sense to be able to vote for somebody and would be easily misled. So there needed to be people that were educated and wise to make decisions on their behalf so that they wouldn't do something foolish. That was the purpose. That was the original purpose of the electoral college. I hate to tell you that. They were right. We have a bunch of foolish people voting for people because of name recognition instead of qualifications, character, and the ability to get the job done, which is consistent with the way Americans would want the job done. You know, you don't want a representative that embarrasses you on the public, on the world stage, who says things, who's inarticulate, who says things that are so objectionable. On the same time, you don't want foolish people that don't know the difference between a boy and a girl. I mean, I honestly think that we're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Really, I really do. And what happens is that everybody with common sense doesn't go into this because they have common sense. Anyways, I've spoken enough. I didn't mean to get into all that. I'm sorry. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And I don't know what got into me, but I hope you at least enjoyed this. Have a good one. Bye-bye.